Hey guys, in this video we're going to cover using preset views and snapping for accuracy. Quick reminder, this lesson is from our complete Intro to Blender course that we're offering for free for a limited time on YouTube. If you're new here, I'd recommend starting at the beginning of the course. I've added a link in the description. Alright, go ahead and open up Blender and let's jump right in.
To begin this lesson, let's start a new file. So go up to your File menu, pick the option for New, General, and there's no need to save the file you were working on. As usual, we'll start with the default cube in the middle. And now I'd like to talk about some more precise transformations while using the transformation tools. So let's start with a quick example. Press G, that's the move tool. G is for grab. And move your cursor up, and I want you to move this up into the air. So go ahead and move up and click. Then orbit around to see that you actually got it up in the air. Now remember, your view matters, so when you're looking a little more top down and you move things, they may stay more near the ground plane. So if that didn't work for you, orbit first, holding down that center mouse wheel, then press G, and now when you move it up and down on your screen, you're moving it up and down more likely in the Z direction. Then click to set it down. Of course, you could press Z while you're moving to lock that direction, but just helpful to know how to quickly pop it up off the ground. Then orbit around so that you're looking a little bit more down at the ground plane like I am here. Now, what if you wanted to set this on the ground so the bottom was touching the ground exactly, not sinking in a little bit, not hovering at all? Well, you might say, okay, press G and try to move it down, but are you moving it in the air floating across? Is it moving down to the ground plane? That's hard to tell, so hit the escape key on your keyboard. Then you might also say, well, yeah, we could orbit, so hold down your center mouse wheel and orbit till you think the ground plane is about even with your eye height, and then you could try to move it down from here, but that's not really going to be helpful because how do you know exactly where the ground starts and stops? So let's talk about a couple of new ways to be precise with exactly how we do our transformations. In this case, moving it to the ground. One thing is we can get more precise views than just orbiting to try to get ourselves down to the ground plane. If you hover over on the right side of the 3D viewport, you see your navigation gizmo. I mentioned this early on for when you don't have a mouse, that you could use this little gizmo to navigate. But there's something else that's helpful here. So where it says X, the little red dot that says X, if you hover over the other one that's not filled in, it's -X. Wherever X is, go ahead and click once on it, and that will jump you to a side view, a perfect side view along the X axis. So it's as if you're on that X axis looking straight down the line, where that Y axis, that green axis there, that's the ground. So that jumps you straight to it. Notice if you hover over that X, it tells you this is a preset view, and it also says the shortcut is Control Numpad 3. So on your number pad, if you press 3, you would get to the X. If you hold down the Control key and press 3, you would get to the -X. So 3 on your number pad is the X direction. Control 3 is -X, or basically flipping you around to the opposite side view. Now for the Y, if you wanted to jump to that view, you could of course click on it, but let's not click on it. Let's remember our shortcuts here. So this one is talking about number pad 1. So press 1, and that's for -Y. I know it's -Y because I can see here in the middle, that's what we're on. Or Control and then 1. Remember, this is the one on your number pad to the right, not across the top of your keyboard. It's the number pad to the right. If you don't have the number pad, then you can just click on these for now. So Control 1 will get you to Y, or just regular 1 on your number pad will get you to -Y. And then 3 is for X. So 3 gets you to one side of the X, Control 3 to the other side. And then for the Z direction, 7, that's a top-down view, or Control 7 is a bottom-up view. So these are quick ways to get to these top-down, bottom-up, or side views of this cube. Let's go ahead and get back to that X direction. So press the 3 on your number pad. This gets you to one of the sides of the X direction of this cube. Okay, so with this particular view, now we can be maybe a little more precise about moving this right down to that ground plane, which is represented by the y-axis here. So press G and begin moving this down, and you should be able to get pretty close, and then click to set it down. But here's the problem. You're still just eyeballing it, so you're not going to be perfect. So if you roll your mouse wheel in, hold down Shift and press on your center mouse wheel to move your view over, and roll your mouse in, you see you didn't quite get it. Of course, you could keep zooming in and moving it closer and closer, but you're never going to get it exact in this way. It's always going to be really, really close, but not quite. So there's more to it than just getting these preset views. Now, to show what more we can do, first, roll your mouse wheel back so that your cube, it looks like just a rectangle with this view, but it's still a cube. Roll back to where this cube is about this size on the screen, and you can see these larger grid squares. So the cube is roughly 2 of these grid squares wide. You want to be able to see the larger ones, not be so zoomed in that you see all the tiny ones. Then press G, that's the shortcut for move, and move this up so that it's not really in line with these grid squares. So notice that if I moved it here, the corners of the cube would be pretty close to a line with the grid squares. I'd like to move it something more like this, where none of the corners are perfectly aligned with the grid squares, just for right now. So I'll click here to set it down. And then roll your mouse wheel back even a bit more, so you really can't see any of the little tiny grid squares. You see the more major grid squares here. So notice if you zoom in, you see tiny grid squares appear, but if you zoom back out to about there, you see the larger grid squares. Okay, in Blender, we can turn on snapping, which will allow us to do different things such as transformations, and as we'll see later, other tools where we can snap the behavior to something else that we see in the scene. So to turn on snapping, if you go to the top of your 3D viewport, you'll see this little magnet icon. Go ahead and click on it, and this will turn on snap. Then just to the right of it, you see it's attached to this other little icon. Click on it, and you'll see it says snap to. And then there are these other elements that we can snap to. And by default, it says increment. Now, increment means an increment on the grid. So we'll leave it at that default. So if you're in this menu, you can hit the escape key to get out of it. Now, press G and start moving this around, and you'll see rather than it being a fluid movement, it's jumping around. It feels like it might be snapping to something. But here's the deal. For me, I didn't have this lined up with any grid squares to begin with, so the snap doesn't seem to be snapping to anything useful for me to get it down to the ground plane. It's snapping right past the ground plane or up above it and nothing in between. So hit the escape key on your keyboard. It turns out that it was snapping 1 meter at a time. Based off of where it started, it was snapping 1 meter forward or 1 meter to the side, and that wasn't really working for me. Now, contrast this if you zoom in a bit and now press G and start moving it around. Notice it's snapping to what appear to be these smaller grid squares. That's a little more helpful, but hit escape on your keyboard. It's still, if you zoom way in, it's still going to be snapping relative to where it started. So if it started a little bit inside one of these tiny grid squares, then it's going to snap forward a little bit past the next little grid square, which means it still won't be perfectly able to snap to the exact ground. It might be a little below or a little above. So zoom back out a bit. It is helpful to know how far forward you're zoomed in or out will be the sensitivity that Blender has for whether you want to snap to the larger grid squares or the smaller ones, but that's still not going to help us yet. So go back up to the snapping menu. That's just to the right of the magnet icon. Go ahead and click. And notice there's a checkbox for absolute grid snap. Go ahead and click on that. Then you can hit the escape key on your keyboard. And now let's try again. Press G. And as you're moving around, notice now it jumps to snap to the larger grid squares, which means you should be able to move it down until it snaps to the green and click to set it down. And now if you orbit around, you'll notice that you've put it right on the ground plane. And also, if it matters, you know that you're exactly 2 meters this way along that green axis. Of course, You could move it back here. So press G and it will snap grid square at a time as you're moving around. And you could move it right back here where maybe this corner point is back at the origin of the X and Y, and click. And now you know you've moved that very precisely to that point.
Hey everyone, we're doing something a little unconventional here, and for a limited time, we're giving you access to one of our paid courses for free right here on YouTube, and this lesson is a part of it. Blender is a beast of a program to learn, but with the right approach, it doesn't have to be. That's why we created Blender Academy, to help people build the Blender skills they need and then go out and get the jobs they want. We hope you find these lessons to be a good investment of your time. If you do, and you're serious about learning Blender, head over to our website and continue learning with us. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And now, back to the lesson.
Okay, so snapping is great for moving things around relative to the grid. Let's take a look at a few other snapping options while we're at it. Let's add a new cube to do this. So press Shift and the letter A. You'll get the Add menu. Then in the Mesh flyout, go ahead and pick Cube. You'll notice it adds a new cube, and it adds it such that the origin point is matched up with the 3D cursor. So if your 3D cursor had been somewhere else, it would have added it to wherever that 3D cursor was. But since our 3D cursor remained at the default location of the X and Y axes, then the origin point of the new mesh matched up perfectly with that 3D cursor. So let's say that we want to move this new cube such that one of the corner vertices is touching perfectly one of the corner vertices of the other cube. So let's try that. First, let's move this cube away so it's really clear what's going on. So press G and then move it away. And it doesn't matter exactly how far away, just move it away and click. Now, we don't want this grid snapping to happen anymore. So let's come up to the snapping menu, click on the icon. Let's uncheck absolute grid snap. And I mentioned something about a vertex matching up this corner vertex, let's say, to this corner vertex. Let's try that. So click on the menu drop down and click on vertex. You'll notice when you clicked on vertex, some of the other options changed, but we're not worried about those for now. So go ahead and hit the escape key to get out of that menu now. And then while your cursor can be anywhere, I find that it's good to put it somewhere near the vertex you're trying to move. It doesn't actually matter, but I find that it is more intuitive to put it somewhere near the vertex you're trying to move, then press G. Now you're moving that vertex and come over to this vertex and you'll see this little orange circle and it'll really feel like a snap right when it matches up with that other vertex. Go ahead and click to set it down. And now you know that vertex is matched up with the vertex on this cube right there. So those are touching perfectly. They're not overlapping and there's no small gap there. But now let's say that you want this back corner vertex. Instead, you want to move it so that it's coming all the way over here. And let's say touching this bottom vertex over here. So we still have the vertex snapping turned on. Let's try it out. Again, I mentioned that it tends to be useful for me anyway to put my cursor near the vertex I want to move. Press G and then bring the cursor over to this bottom vertex. And you'll see that it is giving me that little circular snap. And yet first you might say, this is great, but it looks like my cube is disappearing. In actuality, it's not disappearing. It's just overlapping this cube perfectly. So why is it doing that? Why isn't it hanging off the edge there? Well, I'm going to hit escape so it goes back where it was. It turns out that first, this cube needs to be moved in the general area, but not quite where we want it, so that then a second movement, Blender will know, oh, you want this vertex to match up with that one. Because even though my cursor is over here, Blender's not saying, oh, your cursor was hovered over this vertex, so you must want to match it up with this vertex over here. It's actually only snapping the nearest vertex to this vertex, which happens to be this one here. So the nearest vertex on this cube to this one right now is this bottom one here. So even though I'm thinking of it as I'm trying to move this one down to there, once I get there and I tell Blender that's the vertex I'm trying to snap to, it says, ah, got it. I'll take the closest vertex and I'll snap it to this one, which meant these two cubes were just overlapping. So to make this work better, here's what we'll do. press G, then press Z. So we're locking the blue inference. And let's move it down below the ground a little bit and click. Then let's go ahead and press G and bring this over here and click again. So notice I didn't try to match it up yet. I tried to put it in the general region such that this vertex is now closest to this one. So none of the other vertices here are closest. Now let's try to actually snap it. Press G and move it over, and you see that snap and click. And now those two vertices, this one from here and this one from here, are perfectly touching. So just really important to know that when you're doing snapping, and we're using the vertex snap right now, but as you'll see in a moment, it matters for other types of snapping. You'll often need to show Blender what you want to snap to the other thing by putting those two things closest together before and then moving it again for the final snap. Okay, let's try experimenting with a few other things. So come up to your snapping menu and click on it. And let's experiment with edge snapping. So go ahead and click on edge. Then you can hit the escape key to get out of that menu. So let's say that we want this edge here to match up with this bottom edge here. Remember once again that we're going to need to get this edge close to this edge first. So let's go ahead and do that. Press G and let's move this over here. And now this should be the closest edge to this one. So let's go ahead and press G again and move it up to this edge here. Now notice edge snapping means we can snap anywhere along this edge. So it could be way off to the side. It could be somewhere slid down. And if you come all the way over here, then you could get a snap that's going to be close to this vertex. But if you wanted it to be perfectly match up at the vertices, so where this vertex here matched up, you notice it's not really snapping there. So for just a moment, let's go ahead and hit escape. Click on the snapping menu again, and you'll notice that you can have more than one snap at the same time. So you can select more than one of these at the same time. So if you hold down the shift key and click on vertex, you'll notice that both edge and vertex are selected now. You can let go of the shift key, hit the escape key on your keyboard to get out of that menu. And let's try the same thing again, where we were getting the edge snap, but we also want the vertex snap at the end so that we get the edge perfectly in line across. So press G and then move this over. And then as you're sliding it across, when you get to the end, it clearly snaps to that vertex as well. Go ahead and click there. So in this way, we were able to snap the edges, but also the vertices once we got close enough to the vertex that it realized that's what we wanted to do. Now let's also experiment with face snapping. So go up to your menu and click, it says mix now. So this is where there was a different kind of an icon. Go ahead and click on that. And just click on face once. That will deselect vertex and edge and it will select face. Then hit the escape key. And let's say we want to stack this cube on top of the other one. Remember, we're going to need to get the bottom face close to this top face before we try to actually snap to it so that Blender knows which of the faces of this cube we actually want to snap to this face up here. So first, press G, then press Z. Let's move this up into the air. Now, let's go ahead and press G and then move this down onto the face here. And you'll notice that I'm getting these different circular snaps that tell me that I must be on this face, but it's kind of jumping around as to where it thinks it needs to be here. So let's go ahead and just try clicking here once and then see what we got. So if you orbit around, you see that you were able to actually place this face on top of this one, but it's kind of dangling off the edge. So once again, we could see that maybe we want to snap to the face, but maybe we also want to invoke some other snapping to help us if we want to stack this perfectly. So go up to your menu, your snapping menu, click on it, and pick vertex. Then hit the escape key on your keyboard to get out of that menu. Press G, and let's move this and see if we can snap it to that corner, and we can. Go ahead and click there. And now you've not only, if you zoom out, you've not only placed this where the face is snapped to this face, but this vertex is snapped over here. And because they're the same size, that means this is perfectly stacked around all sides. Now, we've been dealing with metric units all along, but I should point out, if you deal with imperial units, you can change that over in the properties panel. So where we had the object properties open previously, I want you to hover up a few icons and you'll see the scene properties. This is where there seems to be some sort of cone and sphere-like icon. Go ahead and click on scene properties. And then you'll see units here. Go ahead and click on units. And you'll see the unit system being used is metric. So go ahead and click on metric and you'll get a drop down and you can pick imperial. Notice that when you pick imperial, all the grid squares change. Right now, from my vantage point, these bigger grid squares are feet. And if you zoom way in, and I'll have to hold shift and hold down on the center mouse wheel and pan over and zoom in. If you zoom way in, you might expect to see smaller grid squares that would show you the inches. But we're in this three-dimensional view where it's not going to show me that. However, press 7 on your number pad. That will jump you into a top-down view. If you zoom way back, you'll see these are your larger grid squares. Those are for feet. And if you zoom way in, now underneath it reveals 12 different smaller squares for the 12 inches that are in 1 foot. So it works similar to the metric template, only you're dealing with only feet and inches here. In the metric template, you would have larger squares for meters. As you zoom in, you would eventually see centimeter squares. And as you zoom in even further, you would eventually see millimeter squares. For now, though, we're going to switch the unit system back. So in the scene properties under units, click where I switched it to imperial and put it back to metric. Then zoom back and orbit into 3D. So we've experimented with transforming with having snapping turned on. And under the snap menu, we talked about increment, vertex, edge, and face. Now there are some other things in this menu that we'll get to down the line. But for now, those will help you transform things a bit more accurately. You'll notice that so far we've only been moving. You see that it says affect move, and that's default selected. It can affect rotating and scaling. We're not going to cover that right now. But once again, those are options you can turn on if you need to. For now, we're just talking about moving things into an accurate position. And then, of course, we talked about the units in case the accuracy needs to be using feet and inches. You might need to change your units. So far, the accuracy we've been using and what we'll use going forward is based on the metric system. Now, one more thing before we move on. I want to talk about, we added an extra cube here so that we could stack one on top. Let's say you have an object, though, that you set up and it looks great and you need to add many more of it. If it's a cube, you could keep on adding a cube from the default mesh menu. But if it's something else that you worked on, you might want to create a duplicate of it. Now, duplicates and other things related to duplicating objects is a much larger topic we're going to cover in a few lessons, but I'm just going to show you really quickly how to duplicate this cube because it'll help you with a challenge that I have coming up. So with one of the cubes selected, hold down the shift key and press the letter D for duplicate. Then move your cursor. So right away, it's not only given you a duplicate, but it's attached it to a move cursor and you can move this around. Now, just something to note, if you were to hit escape right now, hit escape, you might think it got rid of the duplicate, but actually when you hit escape, it just drops the duplicate down at the exact same spot as the object that you duplicated, meaning that we have the original cube down low and we actually have two cubes completely overlapping here on the top. To show that, press G and move this over and you'll see you're just moving that duplicate away again because it was already pre-selected. So just an important point to make, we would want to move this and maybe stack this on top. But because I don't have any of the snapping going, I'll go ahead and move it off to the side and click to set it down. Then come up and snap is turned on. click where it says mix. For me, it might say something else for you, depending on what you had going on. And I have vertex and face. That should work well. So then go ahead and press G and move this over, and you'll see that you're able to stack it right on top and click to set it down. So I encourage you to experiment a bit. Try turning on and off the snapping. So remember, you can turn snapping completely off by clicking on the magnet icon, and now anything you can do can be freeform. You can turn it back on by clicking the magnet, and then switching what snaps you're using by clicking on the menu item to the right and deciding whether you want it to snap to grid increments, vertices, edges, faces, or some combination of them. Remember too that you can press Shift and the letter D to duplicate the object that's selected and click to set it down, and then use snapping to move it into some particular place. And I want you to play around with this, work on using snapping here in this example, and then when you feel comfortable with it, in the next video, I have a challenge for you based off of everything we've learned in the last few lessons.
Congratulations, you made it through the lesson. Did you find this video to be helpful? Let us know by giving it a like. If you're ready for the next lesson, you can find it in this playlist. And if you're interested in learning more about how we can help you build the skills you need, head over to blenderacademy.com. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, happy blending!